Hi there. I know it's sort of late here on the East Coast. It's after midnight, actually. And I've been putting off getting back to doing some of these live streams because it's just hard to gear myself up for it, honestly. But today I made two really cool pillowcases to go with the quilt that I did last week. So that was my project for the day. And I hate to keep doing these things and being like upset or frustrated. But I'm having a hard time with the fact that the vast majority so here's the thing. I do a lot of my research. I use my YouTube channel to post almost like visual notes for myself and to share with other people. And often I won't say exactly why I'm posting it, but if you follow my work, you can probably look at something and my inclination would be like, oh, what's this? Okay, where does it fit? I have some people like presume because I post something from Adam Newman that I'm supporting Adam Newman. Like, no, he's part of a slide deck that I'm going to be using later. So if you know me and you know the work I do, like you would understand the things I post within that frame, right? And so a couple weeks ago, I spent 2 days and I screen recorded. Now it's up online actually, but the 2 days of the bank for international settlements innovation summit. Now they actually have a lot, and it's kind of crazy because their channel, these talks have like a couple hundred views. Like nobody's really watching the Bank for International Settlements channel. But it's important, right? And it's important well beyond the standard. Like, let me just say something about CBDCs are scary, and then we'll just do it that. Like, bad central bank and CBDCs are scary, and be afraid. But just leave it at that point. And so, I spent like all these, it was like 3 hours, 4 hours. And then I screen recorded it, and then I processed it, and I uploaded it. And then I've actually been, here, let me show you. I've been, I sat down for the first day, which was like 3.5 hour program. And then I took like all of these clips. And this isn't exclusively because I have some from Chainlink in here, but it's a 56 video playlist, and that's only from the first day. And so I went through and I pulled out like all of the things, almost like notes that were important to me to know, to share. And it's hard for me to gear myself up to do these things, and it's tiring. But I had some idea in my head that like every morning I would get up and like have a cup of tea and play 3 to 5 of these clips and talk about them. And I just haven't been able to get up for it yet. But, I'm putting in the time. Like you can see, guys, like this is a lot of work to like, record it all, to understand it, to process it, to pull these clips and to think about it, like to think hard about it and to think about it within the context of the work that I do, which is originated in social impact finance and now is sort of morphing into this idea of the ant computer, or like biohybrid system, supercomputing systems networked. And that's sort of where I'm at now. And so I posted a day or two ago this 5-minute clip. Now I had missed the first day. I couldn't figure out how to sign in because it wasn't streamed. It was only you had to have a WebEx to sign in. And so I was trying to record it for people. I missed the first 20 minutes. And among that, it was Augustin Karstens was the first. He's the head. And then this woman, Queen Maxima of the Netherlands. And so when I went back, Jason said, oh, the talks are up now. You can watch the 2 that you missed. And so, I'm watching the Queen Maxima talk, and it's only 5 minutes. But in that 5 minutes, so she is the special envoy to the United Nations for Financial Inclusion, or FINclusion, which is one of the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's all about turning low-income people, predominantly people in the Global South, because they'll be up first, but to turn everybody, here, I'll go back to the regular thing, to turn like many, many people into impact commodities. And, I've been talking about this since 2016, 2017, understanding that blockchain was the central feature of that. everybody who's been looking after me for the last 2 or 3 years of lockdowns and what have you, like, knows that that's the thing I talk about, right? And so, maybe it's like unreasonable to expect like a higher level of discourse, but I'm not here for just like, it seems like social media has conditioned most comments are just, well, let me tell you what I think about that person, like how they look or how they make me feel. It's from a very emotionally charged state, like, or let me tell you why that person is bad or that thing is bad. And and I think I see some of these Substacks that have, I don't know, like, 50, 80, hundreds of comments. And mostly it's all emotionally reactive, like just off the top of my head, this is what I think about this. Like, not really thoughtfully based comments. Now, there are definitely like some people that do have like comments that are like, let's advance the conversation. Like, I see this, what you're doing here, and this is what I have to think in relationship to this specific thing. Not like, is the guy overweight, or is what the bloodline does the lady belong to, but actually looking at the structure. And that's what I've been trying to get across to people, is that it is the structure. It's not as much as you might say, like, you can use an individual person, and this is often what I do with my, like, when I see someone, I'll look them up, sure, but what story does their life tell in terms of the larger context of what I'm understanding? And does it add a new aspect? Does it shine a new light on something I didn't know already? Does it throw things I thought I knew into question? Does it, like, how does it fit in the story? Like, looking at someone's LinkedIn profile, looking at their biographies, can you plug them easily into a section of the story that you already understand and then situate them there? Or is there something else? And I think that is a much, like, you don't have to judge the person. You don't have to make them bad or evil or whatever. You can just look at them, and it's not like you're looking at them as a, I'm not trying to say to dehumanize them, but really this is all a spectacle, right? This is all a spectacle. And so these people are positioned as actors in the spectacle. They're characters in this game. And so if you can situate the character in the mental construct that you hold about the story, about how you see what's happening in the world, and the sense that you're making out of it, I think that's useful, especially, again, if you can start to find things you've missed, either like shoring up ideas that you've been toying with that gives this more information, gives this more facts to support this idea that you've been toying with, or maybe throws something into question, or opens the door to a totally new story, and something that you can flesh out by pulling on that thread and following that further. Like, that to me is an interesting conversation, and what I'm trying to convey to people, because I've had a couple people say, like, I can never know all the things you know. Like, and that's probably true because I've been working on it really intensely for like the past 8 years. You're never going to know all the things I know. And I'm never going to know all the things you know either, because you will be coming at this with a different life experience and a different toolkit and a different set of resources. So I'll never know all the things you know either. But if what we can do is come up with a way of looking at things, a way of making sense of the things we understand, so that we're not just relying on, what's in the feed, what's in the hashtag, what's trending, the narratives that are given to you. Because for the most part, the social media feeds right now, they're just amplifying the stories, the box canyons they want everyone to stay in. Like, they've got everybody in wandering around, in circles, not really advancing. And what I'm saying is, if you're the kind of person who really wants to follow my work and be interested in it, then you'll turn on your curiosity. Like, you'll take the information and you'll go to the next phase, and then we can come back and compare notes. And and I have to say, as much as I've been frustrated with some of the YouTube stuff lately, I have had like 5 or 6 people get back to me lately with like perspectives from the Labyrinth, which is great. We had one from Bristol. I have one that I just posted about health walks in Oxfordshire. I have another person who did 2 installments of Talahar Desjardins and looking at like his background in noetics and the omega point and how that fits in. I had somebody just send me something from Phoenix. I had another friend send me a dandelion picture that I wanted to share. So like there is so that's great. Like that's the thing. Like if we could get to the point that it was like, rather than like you sort of trotting off like some talking points about bloodlines or CBDCs, to actually know it from your perspective and then integrate some of the stuff like, hey, Allison, I noticed this thing. I wonder how it fits in with like, I think it fits in with the stuff you're talking about, social prescribing. Or Allison, I see this, I've seen these, autonomous cars, and I'm thinking maybe they're doing like visual mapping of the sidewalks or something, like extrapolating. I think that's the kind of interaction that I'm looking for. So we're getting it on the blog side, which is great. We're not getting it so much on the YouTube side. And just as far as like knowing the things, I've never, like my role as I perceive it in this, so I'm mostly doing it for myself because I want to know and I want to understand. Like I would say every couple of months, there's a new concept that I get under my belt to I don't know the right word, like to solidify and both like create a firmer grounding, but then also provide the flexibility to look into other spaces. So, in the fall, it was looking at this idea of, the ant computer, and then it became emergence and complexity in the systems theory. And then now lately, and with some information shared with me by Stuffers, like I've been looking a lot into the morphogenetic development, the embryology. I kind of looked at it before last summer, but put it on the back burner. But this idea of like the cell and signal communication in cellular networks and how this relates to us being agents in gamification, and this idea of morphogenesis and pattern development at a fractal level. So from the cellular level all the way up to populations. And so this guy, Michael Levin, I've been looking into him a lot more the past couple of weeks and really getting a sense for what digital currency is. That digital currency, it's not just a punish you and control you, it's actually a coordinating mechanism. And it's a coordinating mechanism, I think, for a biohybrid supercomputer. And so if we get stuck in the narratives that they're giving you about central bank digital currency, like you're actually not going to have an understanding of what it is, because if you once you look, I mean, you'll see in these clips that I've pulled that the central banks want to imagine themselves as pushing public goods. The central banks imagine themselves as the public good, and this is connected to the commoning, the tokenized commoning. Let me see. They were talking about that the central banks themselves won't be dealing in the programmable money. What they're giving back, what they're giving, they're going to create the opportunity for programmable money for the banking system as it is. They're not going to do it. Actually, what they don't really want fundamentally the structure to change. They just want for there to be programmable money. And the programmable money isn't just about money, it's about tokens, and it's about cybernetics and the coordinating and moving towards this global brain. So all of the stuff about embryogenesis and morphogenesis is really important, but if you get stuck on like, oh my gosh, everything is changing and they're going to take away the dollars and no, that's not how it's going to go. Essentially, they're setting it up that everything be programmed. And so we have to be able to talk about what does the programming mean? Why are they programming money? Not just to control us, but and what are the specific ways in which that they're going to control us? And that goes into the prediction markets and the human capital markets and the bonding curves and the DAOs and there's so many more things to talk about. But everyone is just glommed onto let me talk about the big bad central bank and the CBDC, and that you don't even know what it is. What they want to do is they want to allow everyone else to program it. They want to allow the banks to program it. They want to allow the fintech companies to program it. They probably want to allow the big tech companies like Google's to become banks to program it, so that we're all trapped in the Web3. Like, this is about Web3, but it never gets there. Like, the CBDC conversation stops before we get to Web3 and token engineering. So yes, and here they said, we don't want to mess with your data. The central bank doesn't want to mess with the data. Here, let me just play this.
Both Ravi and Chongyong have spoken very, very eloquently and very intelligently about the programmability of a digital currency. I just want to draw the line between what I understand to be programmability of a digital currency issued by a central bank and alternative provisions. For us, the issuance of a digital currency that would be central bank money would not be programmable, would not be associated with any particular limitation, whether it's in time, in type of use. That to me would be a voucher. It wouldn't be digital currency. Those who can associate the use of digital currency with programmability would be the intermediaries, would be the commercial banks. And that's their business. They know how to do that. But if we are to say that a dollar is a dollar, whether it's cash or digital, or a euro is a euro, cash or digital, then for us, it cannot be programmable. It can be associated with conditionalities, which is different, but not programmable.
Christine,
all right. And here's what she says about the data.
For another topic that has really garnered a lot of attention, and that is the issue of privacy and whether CBDCs could be the data that's going to be accumulated in the use of CBDCs, could be misused. And I think privacy has emerged as one of the issues that has been really very much discussed in the context of retail CBDCs in particular. What would be, do you think, the design features that could really address those concerns? And where do you see the appropriate trade-off between preserving privacy and know your customer and anti-money laundering type of safeguards?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And you are right that the public is particularly concerned about privacy. All the surveys that we've conducted, the client focus group, the reaching out exercises that we've conducted have all said the same thing. People are concerned about their privacy, and there is that, anxiety of a big brother central bank having access to data. And I think that's not a very well-grounded concern. And I'll try to explain to you why. A central bank has zero interest in using the personal data of the clients of the banks, because as François indicated, the banks will be the natural intermediaries that will actually be operating what is legally required in terms of anti-money laundering, countering the financing of terrorism, and know your customer regulatory requirements. The central bank is not going to do that. So the central bank is not interested in data. The central bank does not want to monetize data. On the other hand, some of the big tech companies that are considering venturing in the field of stable coins in particular have a great interest in collecting, handling, and analyzing data on a grand scale and monetizing it. So I think the anxiety is misplaced in relation to a central bank, and should be more concerned about what use is made of personal data and information by some of those large tech companies. Additional point.
Okay, so that's probably enough there. But I just want to point out that essentially what they're developing is this idea of the programmable money. And it's going to use the existing system, but they're going to add in like the fintech and the big tech companies. And so that's the part that gets lost, and that all of the crypto stuff that's was never meant to be separate. It was always going to be come together. And I see Jason made this comment about the unified ledger, and there's another talk with Augustin Carstens that speaks to that, this idea that like at the top there's a coordinating mechanism. And so part of what I want to talk about in my overview, like I've created this a few slides because I've had like, I think it's easier rather than to expect that people who are interested in these topics will somehow absorb everything I've learned in the past 8 years, which is a lot, that you will have your own path. But if it's helpful, I can give you how I think about it. I can give you the framework of how I imagine, like how I do my work. And then if you find it useful, then you have an armature to start with to build off for your own exploration. And so that's what I'm going to try to do with these slides, is to sort of say, now again, I've said every few months I get a new concept. And so it doesn't totally upend the way I understand things, but it redirects somewhat. It brings things into more focus. And I'll add some things, and some things will more fall away. Like at this point, I don't really care so much about the Klaus Schwab World Economic Forum. I've moved on. Like after the first year or so, I like moved on from that. And that's not the key part of my analysis. It's other things. And the things that are on the slides that I'm going to show here are, what I'm showing here now may not be the things that I'm going to keep forever. But let me see. Is that working? Okay. I think so. Yeah. So, so see if this makes sense. So I have 5 slides with just ideas, and I'm going to just do a high gloss over, but I'm going to put a link to the slides there. So if you're doing your own, if you're reading, like I said, be wary of stories that are put in your feed for a certain purpose. But if there are news stories that come and you want to sort of assess how it fits in, here are some ways that you can think about it. And so I think that's better than saying you need to, before you can start your own thing, you have to know all the things that I know, because that doesn't make any sense. Like, it's not about that. It's about like how to think about it. So I'm not saying that my way of thinking about it is the only way, the best way even, but it's the way that makes sense for me. And so I'm going to share it out with you guys now. So, since the fall, I've really been looking at this idea of the like distributed computing and the fact that they're interested in creating a social computer. And so if you and I am going to go back to the BIS stuff, and I think I do need to walk people through it a little bit at a time so you can hear it from their mouths, and then you can like not just glom onto the broad story about central bank digital currency, but actually understand that it is a layering on of programmable money onto the existing system, and actually an expansion, I think, of the banking system and to include regulated fintech and big tech companies. And I was listening to a talk today or yesterday that was really looking at big tech and the Bank for International Settlements and how they would interface. And there are some issues with big tech because they actually have vast amounts of data for like prediction for consumer lending and all of that stuff. So like the big tech companies like Google are going to have way more attributes than the regular banking system. So there's bound to be some shakeups that are coming. But it's not like the whole thing is going to be wiped clean and there's just going to be one central bank and everything else is going away and the dollar is going away and all these things. Like, that's not how they're looking for an ecology of money, but the idea of having it programmable and interfacing with the Internet of Things and digital identity is key. And I would say the biggest changes are really going to happen in as I see it, the global south, where they're looking to bring the unbanked, which was the whole point of the Queen Maxima discussion. She is the envoy to the UN for Finclusion. And so the Finclusion is about getting the unbanked online. And so they're jumping over the old existing banking system, credit card system into digital money. And Leo has talked a lot about that they're working, they're working on getting smartphone, and they don't even necessarily even have to have smartphones, because as Leo has pointed out, there are certain kinds of dumb phones that you can take to like a community center and then sync the phone with the money payments. But it's happening a lot through like agricultural insurance programs and products. And probably they'll be coming through the education programs too for the children. So like we need to have a more sophisticated conversation. Like if you go and look at that Queen Maxima thing, like I was really sort of intensely asking for people to really reflect on the stuff that I've been sharing, and Jason and Leo and Lynn, and we did the whole Flow Life series, and I have more coming. That has to be integrated into the understanding of it. So anyway, so the conclusion. So let me, and I guess I'll just start with this slide. So I'm seeing this now as the token, that the programmable money is not, and especially in the BIS, a lot of discussion about cross-border payments and having them transact like in real time. At some point, like that's the hitch, is the cross-border system, and they talk about the settlement. But it was interesting. There was a woman from Swift, and the woman from Swift said, and that's the payment system. We move data, not money. We move data, not money. And so all of the cross-border payments, I think we need to understand those as Web3 tokens, right? And those tokens can represent a lot of things, not just what we understand currently as money. And these tokens would be linked to rights and assets, and things like, being able to get, use a token to get an Internet of Things connected bike or something like that. You can't sit around for half an hour if like the investor in your human capital is in China and they're trying to like wait on the settlement of the token. Even half an hour is too long. It really needs to be instantaneous. So, that none of that was discussed in the Bank for International Settlements innovation, but that's what's lying in the background, is that the cross-border settlement, as the woman from Swift said, we move data, not money. Everything is becoming digital. Everything is becoming data. And those tokens are going to represent a lot more than just dollars or stable coins or what have you. They're going to be used as a signaling and a coordination mechanism. So like the signaling, the signaling is this post-Moore's Law's computing, is that this idea somehow that we're going to have screens, or that like there's going to be some EMP blast and it's going to destroy all the phones. We're not understanding that the next phase of computing, I think, is organic computing. It's not going to look like what we understand as computing today. Like give it 10 years, it's not going to look the same. It's going to be self-assembling nanotechnology and frequencies and smart surfaces. It's going to be different. And we are going to be integrated into the computing systems, both individually and collectively. And we are going to be interfacing with the built environment. And so that's what they call like cyber-physical and socio-technical systems. So we have to get our minds wrapped around the idea that the tokens and the programmable money at this stage, and the digital identity, and the surveillance for impact capitalism, and the prediction market products tied to insurance or tied to risk profiling or lending, that is all part of a computational program, a coordination program. And so I will just say, like, I don't know the origin of this thing. I've talked about it being decentralized. I've talked about these processes emerging from social rules that go back hundreds of years. But it does increasingly feel like there is some computational effort that we are supposed to be coordinated, the people of the earth, not just people, the animals, and they want to put the land, everything on blockchain to use for some distributed cognition. Now, distributed cognition is like where there's sensing all over, and it's like distributed sensing. Like we are all sensors. Won't you be my sensor? We're all sensors for some larger world brain superorganism, and that individually we are agents in that sensing. Like we are sensors, we are agents, we are avatars. Oh, here. Oh, look, I realized I didn't I didn't change this over. Okay, so we are sensors, we are agents, and we are avatars. And that is really like cells. So the stuff that I'm looking at right now with Mike 11 is all about cells and electricity and the way bioelectricity can be used as a communication device within the body amongst the cells. And actually yesterday I put up a couple clips, and one of them was about I'm trying to remember what the name of the object was. It was a gap, junction gaps. And essentially it was like linking consciousness, like this gap between the cells meant that the information coming through, you couldn't tell what was coming from outside and inside, and so it was like a mind melding state of consciousness. And so this idea of understanding us as agents and then linking all of the things that are happening in cell biology and evolutionary or developmental biology and how they're looking at embryology and morphogenesis. We are cells and we are agents. And so all of those tools and the physics that they're using in the body are going to also be applied at a population level. And so the idea of bioelectricity regulating those systems is very much about a digital currency, an electrical digital currency. And imagine that this fits in with other electrical devices, wearable devices, your smart meter, like syncing your inner biology and your inner electrical state into these other extended systems. Like, where does our body stop and the system start? Like, we all become integrated into it. So I guess that gets onto the second part here, like the cycle and the frequency and the waves. But it's cycles, and so all of this is being regulated for this homeostatic, this balancing system. And so I think the goal of us being a global citizen isn't just reducing it to globalists, like, oh, the globalists, like, and I used to say that too, but that's not actually helpful because it frames it as a different story. And what I'm saying is we have to be global citizens because we're all being positioned as agents in the same body, which is Earth. So that's a different kind of story if you understand, like, we're agents in the game, we're cells in the body of this global Earth creature. It's a different than just sort of saying, oh, those globalists, we hate them. Like, yeah, you can say that, but that doesn't really advance the conversation. Like, this idea of us being cells and communicating through frequency waves and electrical waves, and the way in which the internet coming out of the computer and living on the whole world through nanotechnology, and the programmable money and the electrical money is really all linked to that. So also we have the environmental triggers. So you've got a body, something changes, and there's a reaction. That's what the Cybernetics is. That's what Web3 is. That's what the tokenomics are. So if you have everything connected on circuits, and that's why I think that they're actually moving into an entirely electrical system, right? Like that's the nature of the sustainability, is to move everything electrical, even when it doesn't make sense. Even I was talking with a woman in Vermont, they want to, outlaw wood stoves. Well, who could ever imagine, wood stoves being outlawed in Vermont, but they need everything electrical, and that's because everything will be a circuit, so that if there's an environmental trigger, there will be some AI system that will just change up the circuits to keep something quote unquote in balance or resilient. Now the money is a signal. We hear a lot about open. Everything has to be open because in order to have the most fluidity in the system, you can't have silos. So, we hear that we have to have an open metaverse. Cities have to have open data policies. I'm having a conversation with Lynn about the open education records. These are all signals. Open source intelligence is what this is. It's AI tapping into open source intelligence, and some of that is being communicated through an electrical signal, but it could be represented as money or votes or geolocations or other kinds of tokens. But the signal and the communication aspect is really central. What are we evolving into? Well, this is what the token engineering is going to be. Like Oliver Reiser says that we're going to be a global brain, right? And so that there is this patterning, this construction of us in aggregate to become modular units within the world brain, to become the equivalent of tissue engineering or organ development or whatever crazy things that they have planned. It's that we will be remade through the sensor networks and the money and the electricity into the pattern that is desired for the people of the earth to take on this pattern. And those patterns will have variety within. So the idea that everything is homogeneous would be inaccurate, because I think within the patterning, like, a body has hands and it has a liver and it has eyes. Like, there's different aspects, but they're all supposed to coordinate in the same unit. So this idea that we're all supposed to be the same, I think, is a little bit misguided. But the idea of the patterning is that we self-assemble. So there will be given rules, and the given rules will happen within Web3 and the token engineering. But there'll be some leeway. There'll be some choice. There will be a task to be performed. And then within those constraints, in the choice architecture, the agents in the game will sort of do this assembly. And all of that is being coordinated through the signals. And the coordination will happen on the distributed ledger technology. And I've started really talking more about distributed ledger technology than blockchain, because I think eventually, I think the concept of distributed ledger technology is more foundational. And I think eventually they might just use blockchain as propping it up as something that, like, oh, we just decided we're not doing that because of XYZ issue. But the fallback would be this idea of the distributed ledger. And that's foundationally what it's about. The ledgers are the interoperable data systems creating the twins. And the twins are all linked into circuits of money, circuits of society, circuits of power, circuits in cyber physical systems, and so the ledger will decide. And as Jason said, the Bank for International Settlements, they would like to hold the ultimate ledger. They would like to be the ones at the tippy top doing it, but it's sort of a weird centralized decentralization. There's this perception that it's decentralized, and to a point it is, but then ultimately it's all harmonized within this collective action. So for any sort of given computing task, you have agents that are distributed, there are environmental triggers that happen, there are signals that are exchanged, there are patterns that are made and coordinated. The task becomes complete through some collective action, and that's, again, the collective is like a social insect. The collective is like cells in your body, not the socialists or the communists. It's the collective is acting in unison for a common goal, which is a computational goal, in my opinion. And then ultimately this idea is that we will just disassemble and then repeat for the next computing task. And so this is sort of lays out the basic understanding of where I am at now. And I think if you were to apply these concepts, if you were to go back and listen to the Bank of International Settlements Innovation Summit, you have a very different understanding of what they're talking about. Like, I'm not saying that you can't talk about central bank digital currency, because, like, yeah, it's a thing, but like, it's much more interesting to think about what is it enabling? And is it enabling just something financial, or is it enabling, as I believe, something a lot deeper and more complex and more significant and more foundational to changing what we are as human beings and how we will be managed, and the reason that we must be managed. It's not just punishment or for power or for profit. It's actually, I think that there's something within us, our creativity and our soul and our emergent properties that are being harnessed into this thing. So I think it will be different. So that's my first slide. And then, so how do they get us to play in the game? So these are some other ideas. I think, I did a whole series on eugenics. Eugenics is very different than the narrative of genocide that they were talking about. Many people were talking about early on. Eugenics is this idea of optimization, of taking a human body and optimizing it. And it's crazy. I was working on, like I said, if you're joining late, I made some nice pillowcases to go with the quilt that I made. So that I'm listening to a bunch of Michael Levin's talks, and he's literally talking about, and it's terrible. He has such disdain for nature, like terrible disdain. He's like, nature's terrible. We can do so much better. And yet this is the man who created what he called Picasso frogs, which are like Frankenstein frogs with the the engineering that the faces were all messed up, like the eyes were on the back of the head and the mouth was sideways, and they did that on purpose. And they're saying now, like, oh, the future is just that you would have some sort of device where you could tell it, like, it's like whatever, like the new, these stupid AI art programs or whatever, that you would just tell an AI that you wanted a certain kind of organ or a certain kind of animal or a certain kind of plant, and it would just make it. That's the eugenics that we're talking about, right? It's synthetic biology, but it's really just using matter according to certain laws and rules to create new forms, bizarre forms of life. So a lot of the things that we're hearing lately, like from Protocol Labs, is they talk about giving us superpowers. And I do think there's something to like the radiation hormesis and the nuclear and next gen nuclear and these different things that they're trying to move us in a direction for optimization, but perhaps in some ways creating people who are weak of body, but whose minds have extrasensory abilities. And so I think that there is a certain psychic aspect to this, that they're trying to identify certain kinds of minds and stretch people into ways of sensing, whether they be synesthesia or other ways, sensing beyond our current senses, and identifying people who already have those proclivities. So I think like the eugenics thing is important, but having it framed in the right way. A key aspect of us participating in this computing, because I think a lot of what they're after is consciousness, the creativity, the soul, the inner life of us into the computer. That's Ian Achildes. I put up a clip from him, about RNA stuff, but he developed the Internet of Bio-Nano things. And so it's like using nanotechnology to hook us into the man-made electrical system. And so through altered states of consciousness and the acquisition of sort of spiritual states, I think that they're hoping to get more out of their computer system, like to navigate things. Ultimately, like this idea of live action role play, LARPing, is really important, because that's what's like, I have a 400, no, maybe it's not 400. This one's like 200 or 300 slides that I haven't gotten around to talking about yet, but it's looking at that TV show, The OA, that someone recommended I know it's several years old now, but the thing that hooked me in was the first episode I saw. I accidentally saw the first episode of the second season, and it was an augmented reality game. Like the game has come into the real world. And so, I always understood LARPing. I don't know, what were those, like creative anachronism people, or people who'd like to, like we had a Renaissance fair, out in like Lancaster County, we'd take the kids and, I never dressed up, but, there would be people dressed up in like Renaissance outfits or whatever. Like that's when I used to think of as LARPing, like the kids who would have foam swords and take them over to the park in West Philly and like do kind of, running around gaming activities in the park. Now it's all with Internet of Things and social wearables. And so this idea of extended reality and gamification is really important to understand, but it's also layered in with like military defense simulation technologies. So there, all of the crisis actor type stuff, all the people who've been developing these simulation scenarios, now that's being applied to live action role play in extended reality. And again, I say it often, but like Niantic, right? Funded by In-Q-Tel, the CIA's venture capital fund. So that's where your extended reality comes from. And then like within that, like we have roles to play, we have archetypes, and that's the role of social media, is to tell you what your archetype is, just to take a few kernel, you take a few quizzes, and then it says, oh, you fit into this slot, because the AI is going to be much better at managing modular units for its biohybrid supercomputer if it can kind of plug you in. So having the archetypes, and this is what the kids are being trained for in schools, the social emotional learning and the behavior programming. Google has Classcraft. They have children identify with archetypes, like, oh, are you the healer or the warrior or the mage? And they'll put you into that. And so that goes along with the gaming. And then the next section is the transmedia narrative, which is the story arc. And that was developed, one of the big people in that, her name is Elaine Rayborn, and she's with Sandia National Labs, which is a Department of Energy lab in Mexico, in Albuquerque. And so it's this idea that developed in the military, that you would have a simulation scenario that would track across different experiences, mostly on digital devices. So you'd have something on your phone, and then but there might be a billboard campaign, but then there would be live action role play in your augmented reality headset, and then maybe you'd read a book. And so and it was a non-linear story, so you could enter at different points, and then some of these narratives would involve multiple people. And what I realized actually just this past week is I think actually these escape rooms and these collective problem solving things are part of the transmedia simulation scenarios. I think that those are coming out of military simulation programs. So, just to revisit, you've got superpowers, altered states of consciousness, gaming, archetypes, and then the story that they give you to live within. And I think this is already happening. I think it may have been happening for quite some time, but a couple weeks ago, we had this big thing with a chemical spill supposedly in the Delaware, and there were all of these notices and alerts and things, and it was all blown up in the media, and you could mark yourself safe from the chemical spill, because we couldn't drink the water. I guess that's what they said. But actually we could. They kept just saying don't drink it. You can drink it till this time tomorrow, and then that day would come. And they go, oh, you can drink it. You can still drink it till this time the next day. And so they just strung it along, and then eventually after 4 days they said, oh, never mind, it's fine. And so I feel like these simulations and the machine learning on them has already been going on for a long time. And so as we're occupying these narratives, I see that this is biohybrid computing, this idea of crowdsourced solutions. And this is what happened in the OA, which is what drew me in, was the idea of this house being a portal in a game. And they're crowdsourcing this guy, Pierre Ruskin, who reminds me of Pierre Omidyar. It was luring people into the house for a crowdsourcing solution, and it's this idea of the group mind, but they're going to sell it as something fun and entertaining, or otherwise we might not be motivated to do it at the highest level. And then so all of this is managing complexity and emergence, and this idea of guiding us on a path towards some sort of evolutionary program. That's I feel where it's going. And that's the part where it needs our creativity, our participation. And I think that's why, the AI art and the participation with these chatbots is it's trying to suck up as much as possible of our humanness and our erraticness into this system. And then ultimately, if they can kind of keep turning us into these modules and doing the pattern recognition and development and the morphogenesis, then we hit this omega point with this, which I've talked about, Teilhard de Chardin, which is the singularity. And one of the ideas I've been sort of entertaining lately is that I think, what if we misunderstood the singularity? And what if instead of this idea that it's about machines attaining consciousness, whatever, at some level, or a self-awareness, what if the singularity, because the singularity is really a convergence, right, and turning into a single thing, what if the singularity is actually building a unified global consciousness? And what if we're it? What if we're the target of the singularity, not the machines? What if we're being managed towards the singularity, but the singularity is us, that we are the components of the singularity, and that we will be used by the machine as the way we think we're using these AI as intellectual or mental, prosthetics, that really it's the AI that's using us as a creativity prosthetic, and that's sort of the omega point in the singularity. So I don't know, I'm still sort of exploring this a little bit, but this is what's, if you use that lens, it's a different, the story has a different feeling to it. So anyway, and then, so a huge part of this, and this is probably the key one for taking it along, if you see something in your news feed, apply this system. Does it have any of these elements in it? And then if so, how can I plug it in? This is really the cybernetics, and this is something that Jason and I have been talking about for a long time. And if you're not familiar with the Macy conferences, there's a good website. It's usually the first thing that comes up on Google. Spend some time with the Macy conferences and understand it's about steering. It's about steering, and I think again, I believe at this point, given information, that it's steering us into this supercomputer program. But there, it's that was one of the things that Levin talked about. He talked about different levels, like hierarchical levels of competencies, and that the lower levels don't really know what the upper levels are doing. And so it's all integrated. Like the lower levels do their job so that the whole, the commons, the whole will function. But only the higher up you go, the more you understand of the system, but not everybody understands the whole system. So all of this steering is being done, but different kinds of steering for different groups of people. And that's the cybernetics. And sometimes it includes feedback loops that either reinforce behaviors or disrupt behaviors. And so it foundationally is programming and steering, I think, for me. Like that's the easiest way to understand it. And then, so this critical to when Levin was talking about like agency, having agency, is that you could have some behavior towards a goal, and that different things have different kinds of goals. Some are very, very simple. Simple creatures have very simple goals. Complex creatures like humans can have very big goals that extend over years or decades or even beyond your lifetime. But there's all these levels of different goal-oriented behaviors. And so that's where it starts. You have a goal. That is the pathway. If you see things about lines and paths, that's the steering. Like that's the goal. Now you didn't necessarily in this new thing that's coming with the programmable money get to choose your goal. There's some system, there's some global supercomputer, there's the Ira Levin's The Perfect Day, where it has a supercomputer that runs everything that's determining your goal. And they may be individual or collective goals. Within that, then there are competencies, which is something that Levin talked about yesterday, and I put up a clip about it, and it was quite fascinating to hear him talk as an engineer, because his entire frame, like he's very anti-nature, pro-engineering, and this idea that each element would have a certain competency, a certain ability that you could test for. So understanding that within the context of like morphogenesis, that makes competency-based education and these outcomes-based contracts, like it makes a lot more sense, because they're looking at it in a very systematic way. So you have some goals, you have some skills, you have things you need to be able to do to accomplish those goals. And then you have the optimization, which means like around efficiency, right? How can you do this efficiently? And that's where the feedback loops comes in, and the learning. So you move forward, you make some mistakes, you learn from those mistakes, hopefully, and then you move forward again, hopefully in a more effective or efficient way. So that is the optimization, and it's continually measured, and that's part of the feedback loop, is that there's a step taken, and then it's evaluated, and then the feedback is given, and then you incorporate that into the next step. And so the continuous measurement is coming from the sensor networks. And that's something that Leo's talked about in his latest article over at Silicon Icarus, is this idea that the social impact management is all about the sensors. Everything has to be surveilled and watched so that you can keep getting the continual feedback for the cybernetics. And I think that comes out of the track and trace technologies. So this individual communication technology, and that was my big realization around the atomic ecologies, was during the Cold War, the Atomic Energy Commission was setting up the whole environmental movement and ecological movement by dumping radioisotopes in ponds and lakes and dried lake beds and everything, just to see how energy moved through the ecosystem. And these isotopes were the early track and trace technologies. Only now we just don't have to irradiate everything like with impunity. We just directly irradiate ourselves with our phones. And so that's a tracking and tracing. And that links to the sensors and the measurement and the optimizations and the competencies you're using towards getting to your goals. And then it's individuals and groups. So you have the networked relationships, and that's where the social computing comes in, and that's where the social prescribing comes in, and that's where the programmable money comes in, and the ecology of money. Because remember, as much as they're building up this central bank digital currency to be the bogeyman, what's coming is community currency, digital community currencies. That's what Bernard Lietaer was about. Getting the time banks on blockchain, coming up with digital barter systems, all of these alternative systems that have been sold to you guys is like the alt group as like radical ideas, those were all baked in. Those were baked in 20 years ago. Like that was the plan, that there would be this ecology of money. So the networking is happening through the circuits. Everyone's tagged and traced with your digital identity and the exchange of the signals. And sometimes those are going to be money. Sometimes those are going to be votes. Sometimes those are going to be tokens you use to access rights and privileges and things in the built environment. And then from all of those networks, and that's something, I think Leo has written about it in his series about Cello, is Serafu and grassroots economics in Kenya. Now, again, I'm just saying, I'm not hearing a whole lot of people who are really concerned about central bank digital currency, like looking at specifically what's happening in Africa. Like Sebs has done some, she's done some good work in that. So Africa is a real testbed, and India, for these networked relationships. But the networking that's being sold as, community currency or what have you, that's about the AI pattern recognition. And then the pattern recognition is linked to your digital twin. And at every level. So they're digital twinning, people, households, villages, nations, continents, all have it. Everything is like nested at every level, all of the twins interacting in really complex ways. And that's where the prediction and the risk analysis comes over 4D, which is time. So all of that data moves forward over time. And then there's the performance loops, and it becomes tuned to, again, the goal-oriented behavior. So this system, like when you see something come up about like something odd in your community, like you could ask, like, does this seem to be lending itself to an optimization standard? Like, does this seem to be something that's collecting data for digital twinning? Is there a tracking or tracing aspect in there? Like, I think these are all useful things to understand. And this is the cybernetic piece for me. So I think this is really key. And then I just have some definitions. And I kind of liked this, I've been talking about the labyrinth for a while, and I don't think I had one of these as a kid, but I think I might have known somebody, and this always seemed like an impossible game to play, but it's like a wooden maze, and it has these knobs, and you're supposed to get a marble through the maze, but there's all these holes for the marble to drop through. So to me, this is like exemplifies the homeostasis, this idea of balance. And it really does go back, if you look at Technocracy, like that's the piece of Technocracy that's really relevant, is this idea of an energy economics and keeping things in balance and using electrical circuits to do that. It's based in this idea of, Malthusian worldview. There's too many people. We're on a little planet. There's not enough resources. Everything has to be connected. And that is the circular economy and the stakeholder capitalism circular economy. And then the idea of Buckminster Fuller is that we could engineer all of this as a game, but it could be like a game of peace, right? We would keep everything in balance and in this peaceful way if we could just tune it properly, if we could just get a control over all of the data in real time and make the predictions, we could tune the game for peace, right? But then we'd all actually be living in a cybernetic hell, in my opinion. So, I have a few of these definitions. I'll just hit on these. Thermoeconomics, cybernetics, the Web3 logic layer, token engineering, the sustainable development goals, the Internet of Bio-Nano things, impact markets, driving machine learning, and then this idea ultimately of world peace, which is HAL 9000. And that's sort of like what Irvin Laszlo has been after for a while. And the whole transhumanist is like, we have to be transhumanist so that we can be integrated like into the Borg. And that's how it all goes. So, someone asked me when I was talking about so I don't think Queen Maxima actually talked about the Internet of Bio-Nano things, but pretty much all the other stuff was, if not directly said, indirectly said. And again, she's the envoy for FinClusion, financial inclusion, which is a sustainable development goal to the UN. And so when people want to come up and just say this is about central bank digital currency and the G7 and cross-border payments, and I'm like, that's not sufficient. It's more than that. And the more than that is all of this stuff I'm saying. And and I don't mean, there certainly are a handful of people who show up in my comments and who sort of the comments seem informed by the other things and the vast body of work I've created, but for the most part, not so much. And like, I'm gonna keep hammering away at like, raise the bar. That was Jason's thing. Raise the bar. Like, we need to like be more thoughtful. Like, if your immediate reaction is, "Ooh, I don't like that person. Let me tell you something why I don't like that person." Like, not knowing anything or having done any research just based on something that they said or read, not helpful. Like, what I want to know is how you understand information that I share fitting into this larger program. So to get a handle on it, I put a couple. So here are the definitions. Homeostasis, the ability or tendency of an organism or cell to maintain an equilibrium by adjusting its physiological process. So that's what's happening. Us as agents, we are cells. Everything that Michael Levin is talking about bioelectrical communication and deforming the option surfaces and, being part of the collective, which is a larger tissue or organ or body. That is what the homeostasis is, and that is what the programmable tokens are for. Not just money, but votes and rights and privileges. A homeostatic system state is one where the system is static, but the elements are dynamic. So again, that's where everything is in motion, and you can picture that as like a neural net, really. Like, everything is in motion, but it's supposed to be kept in balance. It maintains its state by internal adjustment. It's the maintenance of suitable operating conditions for the contained system. So again, it's about regulation and balance. The thermoeconomics, the study of the ways and means by which human societies procure and use energy and other biological and physical resources to produce, distribute, consume, and exchange goods and services while generating various types of waste and environmental impacts. Thermoeconomists maintain that human economic systems can be modeled as thermodynamic systems. Thermoeconomists argue that economic systems involve matter, energy, entropy, and information. Based on this premise, theoretical economic analogs of the first and second laws of thermodynamics are developed. Thermoeconomics is based on the proposition that the role of energy in biological evolution should be defined and understood not through the second law of thermodynamics, but in terms of such economic criteria as productivity, efficiency, and cost and benefits of mechanisms. And so this idea of the energy economy, in that way, the technocracy history is useful, and this idea of energy credits and energy systems and keeping that in balance, again, as an electrical system, us being on the earth, being akin to being cells in a body. Cybernetics, Norbert Wiener named the field after an example of circular causal feedback, steering a ship where the helmsman adjusts the steering in response to the effect observed, as having enabled a steady course to be maintained amongst disturbance such as crossed winds or the tide. So again, the trick is, might not be such a bad thing if you actually get to set your own destination, but in reality, that's not going to be how it happens. Feedback is a process where the observed outcomes of actions are taken as inputs for further action in ways that support the pursuit and maintenance of particular conditions or their disruption, forming a circular causal relationship. The initial focus of cybernetics was on parallels between regulatory feedback processes in biological and technological systems. And so like Wiener actually, like his book was sort of like control and communication in the animal and the machine. So, right, like we were just like fleshy machines. In the second wave of cybernetics, from the 1960s onward, the focus was more on self-organizing systems, and then later it became closely associated with neural networks and AI and machine learning. So that's where it's going. So the steering, it's not just steering your biology, but it's steering groups, it's steering systems, and it's steering systems in ways that are also training the AI. Web3. Keep actually begging for people to spend more time on Web3 and deontic logic. So Web3 for this case is smart contracts. So decentralized transactions where you don't need a centralized third party. Web3 contracts govern the rules of any Web3 agreement. A smart contract is a program that defines a set of rules or a contract that executes the encoded rules when called by a user on the blockchain. So smart contracts are far more than crypto, far more than stable coins, essentially it's like this idea of living your life in a video game run on tokens, that's what the Web3 smart contract layer is. And so that's where I think we should be spending a lot more of our time, is understanding that. For me, I see this as imposing a layer of logic that can be gamified and controlled in ways that are unavailable to us as this deontic logic. It is a field of philosophical logic concerned with obligation, permission, and related concepts. It is a formal system that attempts to capture the essential logical features of the concepts. The term deontic is derived from the ancient Greek Romanized deontos, meaning that which is binding or proper. So do we want to live in the CIA's smart contract layer? Token engineering. And again, just because these guys like Block Science, Protocol Labs are small, or maybe they don't have huge numbers of subscriptions on their video channels, this is the wave of the future. Like, this is what is coming. I think it would be far more useful, like, once you know, okay, so there's programmable money coming out of the Bank for International Settlements. Okay, we know that. Now let's focus on what do the program tokens do, and that's the token engineering. And I think that's where our focus needs to be centered now. A discipline focused on the design of self-organizing systems enabled through cryptographic peer-to-peer networks. The next level of blockchain modularity mixes tokens, smart contracts, and organizational processes. These crypto-economic primitives serve as a reusable pattern for abstracting workflows to be replicated across organizations. So essentially what they're setting up are social rules based on the token engineering. Like, they're going to pre-program. Now there's going to be some leeway, but this is about the complexity theory, and the emergence is setting the parameters and then having us act as ants or agents in the programmed reality of the smart contracts. Examples of engineering include prediction markets, token curated registries, and augmented bonding curves. And those are things Leo has talked about. These building blocks amplify blockchain modularity and draw on the synergy that comes from fusing economic assets, workflows, and software. So again, it's essentially like we're going to be living in software. Crypto-economic primitives are what enable decentralized autonomous organizations and future forms of economic coordination we can't even imagine today. And so, so the decentralized autonomous organization, this is all part of the idea of the commons, the tokenized commons, the digital public goods, that this is for our well-being, the well-being economy and well-being management. And so if they can frame everything as a public good, and that fixing bad things accrues a cost offset to the public good, eventually, like the third sector infrastructure is just going to be run as DAOs. And they're going to frame it in ways I think that will be attractive to both the libertarian, conservatives and the left, like anarchists or whatever, as sort of radical participation. But it's all being done within the game of the smart contracts as they are engineered. Okay, token. Okay, so the UN SDGs, I think everybody's pretty familiar. They were passed in 2015, 193 countries at the UN, 17 goals. Essentially, they're the backbone of social impact finance. They create the speculative markets in natural and human capital. Like, none of that was talked about at the Innovation Summit. None of it. Queen Maxima, that's as close as we got to talking about human and natural capital, was hers, but she's very oblique. The impact data is used to train artificial intelligence, and the real-time collection of that data legitimizes global digital surveillance. And so that's, and I think this is, okay, so these are aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals that I think are important. What are they programming, right? So we know clearly the narrative around ESG and decarbonization, and that's something that Leo's talked about, the idea of like regenerative agriculture and other things, and also, sustainable behaviors around the decarbonization agenda. Also for nature, biodiversity is really big, because they're going to be looking at that to get like the barcode of life, get the molecules for everything that they can re-engineer everything. Financial inclusion, finclusion, especially girls and women. My gut says that they want Black and brown girls to code the metaverse, because it will be a great social impact market, especially if these girls have been traumatized, because then they can get all the cost offsets on the ACEs scoring. So that's part of that. Reskilling and lifelong learning. So this is the education part, only we never get done with it. Like it's cradle to gray. We're constantly collecting new skills and new competencies in our lifelong learning pathway. And again, that's to keep us in the goal-oriented behavior setup, right? That's like you've got a gig economy that's incumbent on you always refinancing new education and demonstrating your competencies that you have, so that you're signaling in the skills that you have in your digital locker where you fit into the biohybrid supercomputer. Now, there's something I haven't spent a lot of time on health lately, but early on, the first year of the lockdowns, I was looking at the World Bank's One Health program. And again, that's the way that they're going to pin humans against nature, this idea of like, perpetual pandemic or viral illness transmission, zoonotic disease from animals to people. The One Health idea is a way of, One Health, and also the telemedicine, that's also in this SDGs, of getting the data, the biometric data on your bodies. Now, this isn't actually an SDG, but I think it's important to build into the equation. It's a very materialist framing, that we're moving into synthetic biology. That's what Michael Levin kept saying, like, this is no Garden of Eden. They're pretty much like there is no God. Like we move beyond, like we're the gods. We're the ones who are gonna. He didn't quite say that, but if you want a frog with some sort of propeller in its head, and you can tell the AI to do that, you can just make it so. So that's how he's imagining it. So, but there is something really important about spirituality in this, and they want to reduce it to capital. And that's what the Templeton Foundation has been working on for a really long time. They want to quantify spirituality and sacredness and then factor that into the equation. The electronic government is a huge piece, and this idea of innovating in democracy with all the different kinds of votings, the quadratic and plural and futarchy and these other, creating prediction markets on public policies. All of that is these new innovations in democracy. And then ultimately underpinning it is this well-being economy, because as our well-being is determined by the machine, our performance within the machine, and it's essentially turning over our well-being to the outside-in robot, means that it can steer us and watch us at all times for our well-being. And so it's learning all of that in relation to us. So the well-being economy is really important in the framing of the digital public goods and the commoning, because that narrative is a through line through everything. Internet of Bio-Nano Things, essentially Ian Achildes developed that. It's this idea of using synthetic biology and nanotechnology to engineer biological computing devices. Now think about that mixed in with the tokenomics and the token economy. Based on biological cells and their functionalities in the domain, Bio-Nano Things promise to enable applications such as intra-body sensing and actuation networks and environmental control of toxic agents and pollution. It enables exchange of information, interaction, and networking within the biochemical domain, and creates an interface to the electrical domain of the internet. So I think the Internet of Bio-Nano Things is essentially like an extension of stigmergy, pheromones, coordination mechanisms that are happening at a nano level. And this is probably part of the superpowers that they're planning on giving us is this connection. The impact data markets, I've talked about this a lot in the past, but Trent McConaughey, Ocean Protocol, this idea that all of the impact data is going to be incorporated and made available to train AI. They're going to frame it as something you can make money at. They're going to frame it as privacy protecting, because you can compute on the data and then pull out the results without actually getting at the data itself. So this is all part of the BIS, was all about like, let us protect your privacy. Let us protect your privacy. Well, yeah, because we, in agreeing to adopt a digital identity, we've become an asset. But essentially the new economy is the data economy. So this idea of the impact data driving not only markets to sell the data, but then actually to train the AI towards this artificial, generalized artificial intelligence. And I think this is the last thing, is just like, yeah, like HAL 9000. I mean, so this was the thing, again, not to just keep harping on the Queen Maxima, but there's a lot going on in the Netherlands. I early on I was looking at Francesca Bria, the Rebel City Barcelona Nesta lady, and the wife of Yevgeny Morozov, and she's all about smart cities, and she had developed something called Decode, which was early digital identity, and Amsterdam was one of the early pilots. So a lot of what Leo's been looking at in terms of the biodiversity mapping and those early markets, those are based in the Netherlands. Arise, I think it's called. The idea of ultimate peace as homeostasis, that's how Irvin Laszlo touted it, and that's coming out of like The Hague and the Peace Palace. And I didn't realize Andrew Carnegie created this Peace Palace in The Hague. And then broadly, even just the whole Dutch East India Company. There is historic context. So like, on the one hand, I'm much more interested in what Queen Maxima's position says about her role in what's coming with the new digital economy than simply like her family line. Now, there are many people, like it's a whole industry of things that are people who are out there selling stories about the royals, and I don't know, like, I don't mean to be dismissive, but like a lot of them like veer off into like the Greys or the whatever, the alien people or whatever. Like, and I don't find that particularly, like, yes, you're someone at a certain level of royalty. That, yes, that's a unit. I don't need to necessarily trace the whole ancestry. While all the people are tracing all the ancestry, I think you could actually be looking at the token engineering and the vast changes that are going to be happening to the financial system. And sorry, I'm going to just change this over again. You could be looking at a lot of other stuff, and like maybe people just don't want to look at this. Like, but I keep telling Jason, I'm like, this is it. Like, we know that this is it, and we're both getting tired. It's really hard to show up. Like it would be so charming to have like an inbox, in the next couple weeks with a bunch of people who've been following my work who are like, yeah, we hear you, Allison. Like, we've taken it upon ourselves to look around where we are, to look at a newspaper article and apply this. Like, take these 5 slides and say, okay, this is where I see stuff matching up. This is where I'm kind of confused. I'm not sure if this fits in here. This part doesn't seem to fit. Like, we can evaluate, because not everything's going to fit perfectly, and maybe there's things that need to be added or tweaked. But at this point, if you're just going for the simple narratives, if you're not looking below the surface, like, oh, maybe, I keep waiting. Jason, I think, is eventually gonna do this piece about money. That's his big thing, like his understanding and how money is changing. But it is a signal and a coordination mechanism, right? So once you understand it as that, you can start to look at all this stuff like, oh, wow, like modular population level organizing, and to what end, and it's the whole world, and what does that mean for architecture, and what does that mean for our education systems? Like, there's a lot of interesting questions you can start to look at. And if you're not trying to make everybody bad, because immediately once you're like, bad, and I have some people who leave like comments on my blogs and like all caps, bad, 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 and like every time I see it, I'm like I just shock, because it's like painful, because this is a marathon we're in now. We're in the long phase. We're in the long haul phase, and we can't just run around being shocked all the time and angry all the time. Like, even though I'm kind of being angry tonight, I'm trying to get over it. Maybe I just need to quilt some more. Yeah, we have to figure out how to do this in an investigative way, in a curious way. So I don't know. I guess this is about wraps up everything. But please think about the Web3 stuff. Please think about writing something. Please, I'm gonna have these. I have the 2 Bank of International Settlements, and I have a link to the playlists. Poke around in there. Like, educate yourself as to what they're actually saying about central bank digital currency. It's not going to be the end of everything. It's mostly going to be the same with programmable money. And the programmable money is going, and the introduction probably of fintech and maybe big tech. And that's, I think, foundationally where it's going to have the biggest changes. Like, I would say we have less to be concerned with. I mean, you could say we've always been concerned with the central banks. Like, I'm not saying that they're not a thing, or like, but we know that, right? Like, we know that. So that's there. They're going to keep the ledger. But what we do need to know is, like, why does Adam Newman want to build housing and then link people's, give people bank accounts and link their rent to it? Like, what does that look like? What is that for? Those are the things that I think are more useful. Like, we should look more into Will Ruddick and the grassroots economics. We should be asking the people promoting community currency, like, are they familiar with this idea of like the ecology of money and using money as a signal and all of that? There's a lot more things that we could be doing. So anyway, I guess that's my rant for the night. I don't know. Maybe tell me something encouraging. I don't know what to say. Like, I feel like I'm sometimes talking to a wall. Not that people are bad people, but it's like, maybe everybody's engaged in the time they're actually listening to me, and then it all gets wiped at the end. Like, maybe there's something in this weird system of like doing things online that none of it actually sinks in. But what I'm asking people to do is to be a critical thinker and think outside the narratives that you're given, because there's all this new stuff that we need to be engaging with in a very serious and material way. And so if I say like your understanding is incomplete, like because there's nothing about social impact finance in there, or digital surveillance, or what it means for, coordinating us as a global supercomputer, like, believe me that these are the things that we need to be spending more time on. So, and I just got Steffers recommended this guy. I think he was at Brookhaven National Lab, Per Bach. Keep your brain active. Like, try to learn some new stuff. So this guy, his new thing, you can see the sand on it. So it's kind of, he's thinking about complexity in like the ant computer, but with sand piles. So I'm very interested in that. So I have a couple of giant slide decks that I've been, I probably have like ADHD now, and I'm not getting things done as effectively as I used to. I also, for my friend Liz and Juliana, I apologize. Like a month ago, I started pulling together a map of this trip that I made to New York, and I set a bunch of intentions in New York in connection with the United Nations Conference on the Status of Women. And so I mostly need to hammer that out, and I'll get that hammered out soon. So I have a lot in the pipeline, and Lynn and I, we're going to actually, we had a good conversation about open education resources, and in Texas, some legislation that's for personalized learning, and eventually it's going to be for virtual reality apprenticeships and, LARPing our way to the biocomputer. And so I have a big slide deck for that, and it's going to be a multi-part series, but the first part, I think we're going to screen it on Wednesday night. So, but I may have a few things maybe at least one thing, but between now and then. So anyway, I guess I'll call it a night. So thanks everybody.